figure out a way of surviving on their own at a time and in a place where living without family or community support was impossible. In Ruth chapter 1, verse 6, we read, "When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she decided to return to Bethlehem. Ruth and Orpah, her daughters-in-law, began their journey with Naomi. But in the end, Ruth alone accompanied Naomi to Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, Ruth ventured out to glean and provide food for her mother-in-law and for herself. She just happened to glean in the fields of Boaz, who just happened to be Naomi's distant relative, who, according to ancient laws and customs, was responsible for caring for his relatives in need. Day by day, Ruth gleaned in the fields of Boaz. And at the end of the harvest season, Naomi came up with a dangerous plan that Ruth proposed to Boaz at night on the threshing floor. And here comes the spoiler alert. Boaz ends up marrying Ruth and their son Obed, who becomes the grandfather of King David. In our session today, we're going to look at some of the introductory issues that will help us understand and apply the book of Ruth to our lives. First, we will tackle the most obvious question: who wrote the book of Ruth? While this may be an obvious question, the answer is not obvious. Some early rabbis thought that Samuel was the author of Ruth. But that suggestion doesn't really work, because the book's language and style and purpose suggest a later time. More recent scholars have not been able to agree on the question of who wrote the book and when it was written. One tantalizing idea is that a woman wrote the book. This suggestion grows out of the simple observation that the book features the words and perspectives and traditions of women. But what ancient woman might have written the book of Ruth? One idea is that David's daughter Tamar authored the book. Another is that a group of women wrote the book, or at least told the story and then passed it on. But these are only guesses, and we really don't know who wrote the book of Ruth. Suggestions about when the book was written vary from the time of David and his successors in the 10th or 9th century BC to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah in the post-exilic period. Those who date Ruth to the time of David or one of David's successors place great weight on the book's closing genealogy that links the baby born to Ruth and Boaz to King David. We'll talk more about this genealogy when we come to chapter 4, but at this point, it is important to recognize that the book's closing genealogy calls attention to the fact that David had Moabite origins, and the Moabites, you may remember, were one of Israel's traditional enemies. Supporters of an early date of the book of Ruth argue that the book was written to legitimate David's dynasty, and it did that by making a strong case that Ruth, David's Moabite grandmother, was an ideal ancestor. She was a Moabite outsider who became an insider. She was the woman who responded to Naomi's demand that she return to her people and her gods by saying, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. And your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Ruth was a woman who modeled how to live a life of covenant faithfulness. So key to the dating of the book of Ruth to the time of the Davidic monarchy is the idea that the book was written as a way of dismissing those criticisms of those who questioned David's Moabite origins. Those who date the book of Ruth to a time after the return of the Jews from exile justify their dating in part on the book's theme of inclusion. They argue that the book's vision of the inclusion of outsiders like Ruth suggests that the book was written to protest Ezra and Nehemiah's policies